You're listening to Imperial County SELPA's Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities Meet the Expert series. Welcome to Episode 4. My name is Lupita Holguin Rubio. I am joined today by our team members Vanessa Lopez and Cristina Zavala. On behalf of our SELPA Director, Dr. Deborah Montoya, we welcome you. During Episode 1 of this series, we learned about the value of establishing partnerships between educational leaders from the general education and special education departments in order to discuss and address the complex needs of dually identified learners in a comprehensive way. During Episode 2, we explored the topic of dyslexia and how it manifests in the language and literacy development of English learners. Identifying characteristics and behaviors between language difference versus disabilities was the topic of Episode 3. As we continue to learn about and consider the varied needs of our students, we are focusing on another critical topic related to the unique needs of English learners who continue to struggle academically and whom we may be considering referring for special education assessment and services. In today's episode, we will be exploring some key considerations in the pre-referral process for English learners. To help us learn more about best practices and protocols to ensure an accurate and effective pre-referral process, we have a very special guest who will share his expertise, experiences, and recommendations on this topic. Timothy Tipton, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. Walk us through your origin story.
So I'm Timothy Tipton, Tim. I am a speech language pathologist in San Diego Unified School District. I am also the coordinator of our bilingual support network in San Diego Unified. I'm also a bilingual lecturer in the Speech and Language and Hearing Science Department at San Diego State University, teaching bilingual speech language pathology. I was born and raised in San Diego, California. In fact, my parents are from San Diego, kind of a rare happening. They were born there in the 1930s, so we have a long tradition there in San Diego. I've traveled far and wide since then, having lived in Spain and Japan and up in the Bay Area of Oakland, but of course I went back to San Diego, beautiful place, very lucky to be from there. Also, I must talk about my own personal privilege when I think of being from San Diego. I realize the history of white population living in San Diego. I realize my own continued privilege being white, male, and middle class and cisgender and all the different levels of privileges that come to that, especially when I'm supporting kids from diverse backgrounds. Also very important to me is my family. My wife is from Japan, and we have been raising our daughters trilingually. In fact, they have levels of literacy in Japanese and Spanish at a high academic level, and so I've got to live through their case studies of what's possible with bilingualism, and also continue to want to explore all the other beautiful aspects of diversity and variability in our learners in our schools. Yeah, so well, educationally, I also have a big history at San Diego State University. I have my first degree there in Spanish and television and film. My own mother got her degree in teaching there at San Diego State. I went to San Diego Teachers College. My brothers and sisters have degrees there, so we have a big history there at San Diego State, and I'm even fortunate now to be instructing there at San Diego State in bilingual speech language pathology. I had, maybe I think it was 10 years later, I went back to San Diego State to get my graduate degree in speech language pathology. And in between, I had opportunities to have training in teaching English as a second language. I was in Japan teaching, and I have had training as a bilingual elementary teacher. I spent 4 years being an elementary teacher up in Oakland and back in San Diego. So I my opportunities in education started with family influence, also with some different influences from living abroad, and I think continual training of living and having diverse friends and living in diverse places adds to part of my expertise and my training as well. So professionally, I began my teaching career in Japan as I taught English as a second language there. I had some different experiences there, such as teaching in a private conversational language school. I also was fortunate to be placed in a private high school teaching English as a second language there, so I got to learn about the educational system in Japan and some of the traditions there in education. Then I went back to my home state of California, and I was needed in Oakland to serve as a bilingual kindergarten teacher. So even without any training in that area, I started with an emergency credential teaching a bilingual class, which wasn't completely bilingual, by the way. There were a number of students in the class that did not even speak another language other than English, and so it was a very challenging time for me to learn how to become an educator. I went back to San Diego and worked as a bilingual first grade teacher, and when I was there I started to learn about speech language pathology and observe some of the speech pathologists in my school. I was inspired by their knowledge of bilingualism, their knowledge of language development, and it fascinated me to look into a more specific discipline like that. And so I went back to school and became a speech language pathologist, only to learn that speech pathology, as narrow as it could be, is based on, especially speech language pathology in the schools, is based on a variety of student backgrounds. You need to look at the whole child in addition to their language development. You need to see what opportunities they've had instructionally, what languages they've been exposed to in their home. So as much as I tried to become a specialist in speech language pathology, I realized that some of my experiences being a teacher and teaching English and living abroad in different places has really allowed me to take a more of a holistic approach to being a speech language pathologist. Yeah, well, I have been in education for a long time. In fact, I have a family of educators, my mom being a classroom teacher, and my sister being an environmental educator, my brother's a music educator in the schools. I think the first time I felt like I was an educator is when I was trading English language lessons for guitar, flamenco guitar lessons, and I lived in Spain. But after Spain and having met my Japanese wife there, I had ended up in Japan, where I had some formal training at teaching English as a second language and teaching in the schools there, in a private school, and learning about the school system there. And then coming back to California, I was placed as a bilingual kindergarten teacher in biliteracy program, and so I got to learn a lot about teaching and all the hard work that teachers do in their in supporting students, especially young students from such diverse backgrounds. In fact, in that biliteracy classroom, maybe only about half of them actually spoke Spanish. Many of the other half were English-only students. Maybe I should have tried to come up with a dual language program or something. It had been early, but I should have tried. And so, and then I became a teacher. I was also a teacher down here in San Diego, and in both of my teaching settings here in California, I became very attracted to the idea of focusing on language development, and so I got to follow around some speech language pathologists in those settings, and it was enough to inspire me to leave my teaching career and go back to school full time to become a speech language pathologist, and I ended up with my bilingual certification education in speech-language pathology. And I think those diverse backgrounds of teaching and living abroad and teaching English second language, teaching bilingualism and becoming a speech-language pathologist had allowed me to take a broad perspective on collaboration and teaming across disciplines. So it led me to some great opportunities where I've also worked at school sites as a speech-language pathologist in bilingual schools. I was able to become a senior speech-language pathologist in San Diego Unified for a while. And my current role now is as a bilingual coordinator of our bilingual support team, where we support consultation and assessments in speech pathology, school psychology, and for our ed specialists as well. But maybe the most meaningful opportunity I've had professionally, especially for the reason why I'm presenting here today, is I was able to be on a few different teams in San Diego Unified that were called transdisciplinary teams. The first one was an English learner transdisciplinary team, and then we became a culturally and linguistically diverse transdisciplinary team, and we started focusing on African American students in special education as well. And we were able to develop processes and procedures and do lots of professional development on English learners who may or may not have disabilities. And so many of the resources and practices that I'm sharing today came out of some of that work.
During this episode, we've been focusing on the pre-referral process and as it pertains to English learners who continuously struggle academically and linguistically. We would like for you to share with our audience perhaps some strategies or tools that you would consider high leverage resources as we delve deeper into this topic of the pre-referral process for English learners.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, many of the tools that I'm referring to came out of San Diego Unified. We were found to be over-identifying our English learners with disabilities, and we realized that we need to be more systematic across school system in order, how do we support these students? So we had developed a process with some collaborators, bilingual school psychologists, bilingual ed specialists, and sharing that process across other stakeholder and community groups. And and that process is called the comprehensive evaluation process for English learners. It's been used in San Diego for over 10 years now, and it continues to be an expectation for our staff. And fortunately, it's been seen as supporting others outside of our district to the extent that it's now a big part of the California Guide, Practitioner's Guide for educating English learners with disabilities. And so many of the strategies and practices that I'm referring to now are very easily accessible in that guide as well, and also that's why I'll be referencing a lot of that work. But in the area specifically to pre-referral that we're talking about today, a big emphasis of this work is multi-tiered systems of support, and using the data that comes out of that in an RTI type of form to influence whether we suspect a disability and also help us determine eligibility for special education. And it takes a very holistic approach to students of looking at all the extrinsic factors, that all the strengths and assets that they bring, as in addition to any factors that might be impacting their learning and that we need to examine and support. The other point that runs across all of the work and all the strategies that I like to remind staff and educators about is what I was trained to call a transdisciplinary process. So it's very similar to interdisciplinary process where we're working with each other and across boundaries and disciplines. Very similar to a multidisciplinary approach as well, but that multidisciplinary may be more coming together later and having these conversations, whereas transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary sets out to collaborate from the beginning and learn from each other, share data, and leverage your expertise together. The other big element that I think that cuts across all of these different guides and manuals that we're referring to is to gather authentic performance-based data, collect data that cuts across different perspectives, and bringing in parents, bringing in all the stakeholders in the schools, those that know the student the best, using different measures, not relying on one type of measure like a specific test, but looking at interviews, observations, curriculum-based measures. And then finally, that we look at kids across contexts, and as we see them over time, we see them, we learn about them in how they perform at home versus school, or how some of their needs cut across different areas. Really brings this work together so we get to know the student at a deep level. We have a wide view of what's happening, and we find authenticity and validity in doing our work together collaboratively. Yeah, of course, a big part of this work is making sure that we do our job with compliance, and knowing that there are implications to when there's over-identification for certain groups in special education. We're also doing our best to make sure that we're not pushing any sort of envelope the other direction, and finding that people are finding they're too burdensome to refer kids to special ed, and finding that there's underrepresentation. So finding that right balance where we can push back when we're getting lots of referrals of special education, when really these maybe be some very typical reasons why students aren't succeeding in the classroom, and they really aren't exceptional. So I think a lot of the procedures that you've learned about will allow us to take a very critical stance of who our students are, and look at them holistically. And in order to do that, we require some time and resources to do that. We're part of Child Find as well, where we need to identify kids with disabilities, part of our legal obligations. But in order to do that, we need to look at the whole child. Often that's having the resources to look at the child in their primary language, gathering data in their primary language, having the staff that speaks those children's primary language, providing enough resources for interpreters and translators in order to be that bridge with families and students, because that's who we're talking about here today, these multilingual learners that we want to support, not just their English language development and pushing that forward, but we want to support them as whole children becoming multi-language learners, and supporting them requires supporting that primary language, supporting all of their languages.
The Imperial County SELPA Content Lead Grant, Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities team, has utilized and highlighted several of the resources from the California Practitioner's Guide that were sourced from the CEP-EL. As you're familiar with some of the resources that we created in support of the tools from the CEP-EL, what are some of the highlighted tools that you would like to speak to and share with our audience?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for asking. First of all, I want to thank you all for all the time that you've spent in taking such a large document, which is the California Practitioner's Guide for English Learners with Disabilities, and breaking it up into much more digestible forms and practical and useful forms for our practitioners. Some of these forms that were developed in Senate Unified, we do have some of those forms developed into a template form where you can actually type in some of the information that you're learning about students. You can share it across colleagues as we work in a transdisciplinary manner. And it's wonderful to see, going through your website, that many of those tools are part of the appendices, and they actually are in that writable format as well. So I think if we start with thinking about the CUME file check, and how staff might be thinking that as a review of existing records, and looking in the CUME file, but also on other public records or other records they have in the data systems, that they're using that to not only just guide them in what they're thinking about in a student's background, but also supporting them in who to go to kind of gather more information or get support. So if it's in the area of hearing, knowing that you could be going to the nurse, but you can also be talking to the parent or observing in the classroom to see if the student is impacted by their hearing difficulties. There's also the resource that you have on there for guiding the investigation into extrinsic factors. So that allows teams to not use it as an interview, but use it as a thinking document where maybe they are checking off, like, hey, did we consider some of these physical, psychological factors? Did we consider these personal, cultural factors? Are we considering the language factors and the learning factors in order to determine what's really the primary reason our students doing well, or maybe having difficulty accessing their curriculum, and taking that and turning it into a form of tiers of support, and supporting those students is the natural outcome after that. And then after all that good intervention and support, we really need to make a case that we suspect that there's a disability. And that's what the intervention summary form is for. That's also made available through your resources, through the appendix, that where you summarize what supports you did do with academically, behaviorally, and even in some of these extrinsic factors. So when we do refer a kid to special education, it's a strong referral. If that student ends up being found eligible for special education, we can say that we truly ruled out some of these exclusionary criteria or extrinsic factors using those forms. And then gathering all that information at the beginning, it takes lots of different tools and lots of different resources, lots of perspectives. Another resource is also made available through the appendices is the list of tools for gathering information on extrinsic factors. It takes you through a wide variety of records review, of different types of interviews, how to gather observational data that could be watching a student in a classroom, or taking comparison notes and observations, observing them in motivational contexts like social settings. It also talks about different types of probing that we could do for students, language sampling, gathering criterion reference measures, rubrics. So it's just a lot of good data sources for our students that's available there as well. I remember also being fortunate to be a part of some of the development of some of these resources that are on there in San Diego. There's this classroom observation tool for making sure that students are getting access to high quality English language development and English learner teaching and instruction, and that's another opportunity to gather data. There's some interviews on there that could be used with students. There's some interviews that you can use with teachers, with parents that are available on there, and most of these I believe are found in the appendices. And if there's one more resource that in reviewing this again, I remembered that's going to really support a lot of students in a very holistic way, which is the infographic on gathering referrals. So I think that the infographic will take you, it's covering chapter 3, and it'll take you through some of these tools that I'm referring to. So if you're in this interview, you want to actually not just have to hear it and take notes, you want to see this. I think you look at that infographic, it'll take you through some of these tools. It'll take you through some of the data points you're going to want to collect, and what are some of the hallmarks that might lead us to suspect a disability and make a good referral to special education. Well, yeah, thank you so much. It's my dream, I guess, when I began this type of work as an English learner support and in special education, was that there were folks out there like the Imperial County Office of Education that had the time dedicated. I had it for a number of years in San Diego, but to have that time that you have now dedicated to creating these resources, to putting these resources together in, like I said, digestible chunks for us to kind of learn, so we don't have to just learn it all at one time. All the high quality professional development you're bringing in. I personally attend many of the trainings that you put out there, because I like a lot of us, we know there's room for growth, and you have a lot of great presenters coming and providing information. It's quite an honor to be a part of this, and it's humbling to be able to be a piece of this because of the high quality of work that you are all producing. To feel that I can be a part of that as well is humbling, because I really appreciate all the work you're doing. Thank you. Yeah, well, I guess if there's one final thought that I have is that a lot of these policies and practices and tools that are part of our guide and been part of San Diego's guide are really established best practices across the state and have been that way for a long time. I think of the English Learner Roadmap that has I think it's their first very important principle for about being assets oriented, needs based in supporting our English learners. That knowing that we have to, when we look at our English learners, we're not seeing it as what they need to learn in their English language development as much of all of the assets and the wonderful learning they do bring to us. And when there are needs, we're reflecting on those needs and taking care of those needs. And when we are looking at each student, we're looking at them individually. We can come up with these trajectories of language development and possibilities for primary language exposure or not. But if you know one of these students, you know one of these students. They're so unique. And so learning about their variables takes a wide swath of information, again, from different perspectives. And the first perspective we're always going to is the family perspective. And so we can't be making these big, meaningful decisions for students without them and without the guardians and those that really care the most and know the student the most. And so as we get, and then another part of the principle that they have in Principle 1 is gathering information, working collaboratively and gathering authentic data that's valid for our students, and without using all the different support staff and that have their different levels of expertise, without using some of these different tools that we referred to, without looking at kids across context, the context of home versus school, the context of their primary language versus their learning of English, then we're really not going to know the whole child and support them in the way that's best for that one particular child.